I'm a 28-year-old woman working as a freelance graphic designer. Growing up, I lived in a small, tight-knit family where my mom constantly compared me to my cousin Lily. If you've ever been in a family with a golden child, you'll understand what I mean. Lily was everything my mom wanted me to be. She's a lawyer, married to a doctor, has 2 adorable kids, and lives in a big house with a perfectly manicured lawn. Meanwhile, I rent a tiny apartment, work from home, and I'm not exactly rolling in money. The comparisons started early. Lily was the poster child for success, straight A's, class president, homecoming queen, you name it. On the other hand, I was the quiet, artsy kid who struggled with math and preferred sketching in my notebook over socializing. Every school report card, every family dinner, my mom would find a way to slip in a comment about Lily. Why can't you be more like Lily? Or Lily wouldn't waste her time on something like that. These comments weren't just casual observations. They shaped the way my mom treated me. While she bragged about Lily's achievements to anyone who'd listen, she rarely even acknowledged mine. The few times she did, it was followed by some kind of critique. Over time, it put a strain on our relationship. I only talk to her now during family gatherings, and even then, the conversations are shallow and awkward. I just couldn't deal with the constant reminders of how I didn't measure up. Lily, of course, was always perfect, at least on the surface. She was polite, charming, and effortlessly graceful, the kind of person who makes everyone else feel a little less polished in comparison. She never seemed to resent the pedestal she was put on, or the fact that our family dynamics revolved around her perfection. In fact, she never acted smug about it, which somehow made it worse. You couldn't even hate her for it. The tipping point came during a family reunion last year. My mom was in her element, bragging about Lily's latest accomplishments to a circle of relatives. I overheard her mentioning how Lily's husband was not just a doctor but one of the best in the state, how her kids were already excelling in school, and how Lily still found time to run marathons and volunteer. Then she shifted the conversation to me, but not in a way that felt good. She's still doing her little freelance thing, my mom said, using a tone that made freelance sound like unemployed. She laughed as she added, "You're lucky to even be invited to these reunions. Lily's family is the only reason we still have a good reputation." I stood there, frozen. My face burned with embarrassment and anger, but I didn't say anything. What was the point? Arguing with her wouldn't change how she felt. That night, as I replayed the scene in my head, something shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. Determined to prove that no one's life, not even Lily's, is as perfect as it seems. The first clue came to me when I thought back to the reunion. Lily's husband had been distant, almost uninterested. He left early, claiming he had a work emergency, but something about it felt off. He barely spoke to Lily the entire time and was glued to his phone during dinner. I started to wonder if their picture-perfect marriage was as flawless as it looked. That curiosity led me to Lily's social media. Her Instagram and Facebook accounts were perfectly curated, full of happy family photos, vacation shots, and inspirational quotes. But the more I scrolled, the more I noticed little inconsistencies. She posted about a family weekend 2 weeks ago, but her husband wasn't in any of the pictures. A mutual friend mentioned seeing him at a local event with another woman. That stuck with me. I started reaching out to old acquaintances from our hometown, people who might know more about Lily's personal life. It wasn't easy since I wasn't exactly close with these people, but I managed to get a few casual conversations going. I didn't find anything earth-shattering at first, just small details that hinted at cracks in Lily's perfect facade. Around the same time, my mom and I had another blow-up. She criticized me for showing up alone to a wedding, saying even Lily would have managed to find a date. It stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. If my mom wanted to keep idolizing Lily, fine. But I was done silently enduring it. I decided that at the next family reunion, I'd be ready. Not to humiliate Lily, this wasn't about her. It was about proving to my mom, and maybe to myself, that perfection doesn't exist. Everyone has skeletons in their closet. Some are just better at hiding them than others. Update 1. A few weeks after the family reunion, I ran into a former high school classmate at a coffee shop. We got to talking, and somehow the conversation shifted to Lily. Turns out, this person knew her pretty well back in college. That's when I learned something surprising. Lily, the golden child of our family, had a wild streak in her younger years. One story stood out, a minor shoplifting incident that nearly got her arrested. She managed to talk her way out of it, and the whole thing was swept under the rug. I brought it up casually the next time I saw my mom. She didn't even flinch. Her response was something along the lines of, "Oh, Lily was just experimenting. She was young, and everyone makes mistakes." It was clear she wasn't going to let this tarnish Lily's image. If anything, it seemed like she admired Lily's ability to bounce back, brushing it off as a learning experience. But that wasn't the only thing that caught my attention. At every family event, Lily's husband, Paul, always seemed distracted. He was constantly on his phone, stepping outside to take work calls, or finding excuses to leave early. At the last reunion, he left before dessert, which was unusual since he's usually the first in line for pie. Something about his behavior felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than just being busy. Then, out of nowhere, I received a direct message on Instagram from an anonymous account. It said, "You don't know me, but I think Lily's husband is cheating on her. I've seen him at local event venue with another woman." At first, I wasn't sure what to make of it. The account had no posts and no profile picture, but the message was detailed enough to feel legitimate. I didn't respond, but I couldn't ignore it either. A few days later, I reached out to another mutual friend who works in Lily's industry. Over drinks, they mentioned something that made my jaw drop. Apparently, Lily had been involved in a plagiarism scandal early in her career. She had copied significant portions of another lawyer's work and presented it as her own. The firm kept it quiet to avoid bad press, but she narrowly escaped being fired. They even reassigned her to a different team to keep things under wraps. This wasn't the polished, perfect professional image Lily always portrayed. At this point, I started compiling everything I was learning. not to destroy her reputation or cause drama, but because I wanted to have concrete evidence when the time came to confront my mom. If I was going to challenge years of being told I wasn't good enough compared to Lily, I needed my facts straight. One thing I noticed as I dug deeper into Lily's life was how carefully curated her social media presence was. Every post looked like it belonged in a magazine, perfect lighting, coordinated outfits, and captions about gratitude and success. There wasn't a single unpolished moment, no candid shots or mentions of bad days. It felt too perfect, almost rehearsed. I decided to test the waters at a small family dinner. When the conversation turned to work, I casually brought up the plagiarism incident, framing it as something I'd heard through the grapevine. Lily's reaction was subtle but telling. She laughed it off, saying something vague about office politics and changing the subject. Her mom, my aunt, immediately chimed in, brushing it off as a minor setback. Every professional faces challenges, she said. Lily rose above it. Meanwhile, Paul's behavior was becoming harder to ignore. At a family barbecue, I noticed him texting someone on his phone. He turned the screen away whenever anyone walked by. Out of curiosity, I glanced over his shoulder once when he wasn't paying attention. The contact name was just a single letter, K. I didn't recognize the name or the number, but the way he was glued to his phone felt off. I started to notice inconsistencies in Lily's timeline, too. She always talked about landing her dream job right after law school, but the dates didn't line up with the story I'd heard from our mutual connection. There was a gap of almost a year that she never mentioned, and I couldn't help but wonder what she was hiding. Despite everything I was uncovering, my mom continued to idolize Lily. Anytime I brought up something questionable, she'd find a way to dismiss it or twist it into a compliment. When I mentioned Paul's behavior, she waved it off, saying he was probably stressed from work. It was frustrating, but it also strengthened my resolve. I needed to get to the bottom of this. I decided my next step would be to talk to Paul directly. If there was something going on, I wanted to hear it from him. I started planning how to approach him without making it seem confrontational. At the same time, I noticed that the family was starting to pick up on the tension. Some relatives seemed more cautious around Lily, while others were still firmly in her corner. It felt like the cracks in her perfect facade were becoming visible to everyone, not just me. The next family gathering was coming up, and I knew it was going to be a pivotal moment. This time, I wouldn't just sit back and listen. I was ready to confront the myth of Lily's perfection head-on. Update 2. A week before the next family gathering, I decided to take a risk and confront Paul, Lily's husband. I sent him a casual message suggesting we grab coffee, framing it as a chance to catch up. He agreed, and we met at a small cafe that wasn't too crowded. At first, the conversation was light, work, family, and general small talk. Then, I shifted gears and asked him directly about the anonymous message I'd received. Paul's demeanor changed instantly. He looked down at his coffee cup and sighed heavily. After a long pause, he admitted he'd been having an affair. He explained that the relationship had started as a mistake during a rough patch in his marriage but had continued far longer than he'd intended. He begged me not to tell anyone, emphasizing how much he cared about his kids and how devastating it would be for them if the truth came out. I didn't promise anything, but I left the cafe feeling more conflicted than ever. As the family reunion approached, I wrestled with what to do. On one hand, I didn't want to hurt Lily or her children by exposing Paul's infidelity. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore what I knew, especially when my mom continued to hold Lily up as the epitome of perfection. Ultimately, I decided to speak to Lily privately before the gathering. If she already knew about the affair, it would be her choice to address it, or not. The opportunity came 2 days before the reunion. I invited Lily out for lunch and started the conversation by mentioning Paul's behavior at family events. She didn't seem surprised. When I brought up the affair, her calm facade crumbled. She admitted she'd known about it for months but had chosen to keep it quiet to maintain their perfect image for the family. She described how exhausting it was to keep up appearances, especially with my mom constantly praising her as the family's golden child. As if that wasn't enough, Lily confessed that their financial situation was a mess. The big house, luxury vacations, and private school tuition for her kids were all funded by credit cards and loans. She admitted she was drowning in debt but didn't know how to scale back without drawing attention to their struggles. I told Lily she needed to tell the truth, not just about the affair but about everything. She resisted at first, insisting that it would only make things worse. But after a long conversation, she agreed to come clean at the reunion. The day of the family gathering, tension was in the air from the moment I arrived. Lily showed up with her kids, but without Paul, who had conveniently made other plans. During dinner, Lily stood up and announced that she had something to share. The room fell silent as she began to speak. She started with the affair, explaining that she and Paul were separating and that their marriage hadn't been as perfect as it seemed. Then she moved on to their financial troubles, admitting that the lifestyle they'd been flaunting was unsustainable. The reaction was mixed. Some family members immediately offered support, while others looked shocked and uncomfortable. My mom, however, refused to believe it. She accused me of putting ideas into Lily's head and fabricating the entire story. Lily tried to defend me, but my mom wouldn't hear it. She clung to the idea that Lily could still fix everything, and blamed me for stirring up unnecessary drama. Over the next few days, the family began to divide into factions. Some relatives sympathized with Lily, appreciating her honesty and acknowledging how hard it must have been to live under the pressure of perfection. Others criticized her for keeping up the charade for so long. Meanwhile, news of Lily's struggles began to spread through our small town community. People who had once admired her picture-perfect life started whispering about the affair and financial problems. Amid all this, something unexpected happened. Lily and I grew closer. During one of our conversations, she admitted she'd always envied me for having the freedom to live authentically, without the burden of trying to meet everyone's expectations. It was a strange moment, hearing that from someone I'd spent my entire life being compared to, but it helped me see her in a new light. The family dynamic began to shift as more people started questioning my mom's obsession with perfection. For years, she had used Lily as a weapon to criticize me, but now the cracks in Lily's facade were impossible to ignore. Despite everything, my mom remained stubborn. She insisted that Lily could still redeem herself and refused to acknowledge that I might have been right all along. As for me, I began to feel a sense of vindication. Some family members who had always sided with my mom started reaching out to apologize for the years of comparisons. They admitted it hadn't been fair to hold me to an impossible standard, especially now that the truth about Lily's life was out in the open. But my mom? She refused to budge. No matter how much evidence there was, she clung to her belief that Lily was still the ideal role model, and that I was somehow to blame for the family's current tensions. It hurt, but I realized I couldn't keep seeking her approval. Instead, I decided to focus on myself. Lily's confession had been the catalyst for a lot of changes in our family, but I knew it was time for me to let go of the past and build a life that didn't revolve around proving my worth to my mom. Lily and I agreed to support each other moving forward, knowing we both had work to do in rebuilding our lives, but this time, without the weight of perfection dragging us down. Update 3. After Lily's confession at the family reunion, I thought things might calm down. Instead, everything seemed to spiral even further out of control. My mom, who had spent years elevating Lily as the family's golden standard, didn't take the news well. Rather than accepting what Lily shared, she went on the offensive. She accused me of orchestrating the entire situation, saying I had poisoned Lily's mind with jealousy and resentment. It didn't take long for the rest of the family to start choosing sides. Some relatives believed me, saying it was brave of Lily to finally be honest about her struggles. They acknowledged how unfair it had been for my mom to compare us all these years. Others, especially those closer to my mom, accused me of stirring up drama unnecessarily. One of my uncles even muttered that some things are better left unsaid, claiming I should have let Lily handle her own issues privately. The division became even more apparent as Lily began to withdraw. She stopped attending family events entirely, which raised eyebrows among relatives who hadn't been at the reunion. At first, people were confused, but the rumors started spreading fast. Someone, likely one of our cousins, shared details about Paul's affair and their financial troubles with a mutual friend, and from there it was everywhere. The gossip reached old family friends and acquaintances in our small town community. Suddenly, the perfect image Lily had worked so hard to maintain was falling apart. The backlash was harsh. People who once admired Lily started sharing their own criticisms. Someone mentioned how Lily had always seemed fake, constantly showing off her perfect life. Another recalled how she never let anyone into her home unless everything was spotless. It was like her entire persona was being dissected in real time. In the middle of all this chaos, I received an unexpected call from my aunt, Lily's mom. She invited me over for coffee, which was strange because we'd never been particularly close. When I arrived, she admitted that she'd known about Lily's problems for months. She explained that Lily had confided in her about the debt and Paul's infidelity but begged her not to tell anyone. My aunt said she felt powerless to intervene because of how much pressure Lily was under to appear perfect. Hearing this made me wonder how long Lily had been struggling while everyone else, including me, assumed her life was flawless. It also made me realize how deeply my mom's obsession with perfection had impacted not just me, but Lily too. A few weeks later, my mom called for a family meeting to clear the air. I knew this wasn't going to end well, but I went anyway. As soon as everyone sat down, my mom launched into a tirade about how the family's unity was falling apart because of me. She claimed I had always been jealous of Lily and accused me of airing dirty laundry to embarrass her. I stood my ground. I pointed out how the years of comparisons and unrealistic expectations had set this stage, not me. I explained that I wasn't trying to bring Lily down, I just wanted the truth to come out so we could all stop pretending. Some relatives nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. My mom, however, refused to budge. She insisted that Lily's problems were temporary and could be fixed with more discipline. The most shocking moment came when Lily spoke up. For the first time, she admitted she was considering divorce and moving out of the big house. She explained that she couldn't keep up with the expenses and didn't want to stay in a toxic marriage for the sake of appearances. The room went silent. My mom broke the tension by claiming Lily just needed to work harder and get her priorities straight. It was infuriating to watch her refuse to acknowledge the reality staring her in the face. After the meeting, Lily pulled me aside. She admitted that, despite everything, she felt a strange sense of relief. She was terrified of starting over, but also grateful that the facade was finally crumbling. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For once, she wasn't the perfect cousin, and I wasn't the black sheep. We were just two people trying to navigate the messiness of life. As all this unfolded, I noticed a subtle shift in how some family members treated me. Relatives who had once brushed me off started defending me against my mom's harsh words. They acknowledged how unfair the constant comparisons had been, and a few even apologized. It wasn't a complete 180, but it was a start. Meanwhile, my mom found herself increasingly isolated in her defense of Lily's perfection. With each passing week, more relatives started seeing through the charade. And even my aunt, who had always been one of Lily's biggest supporters, began to question my mom's relentless need to uphold an impossible standard. The community gossip continued, but instead of breaking Lily, it seemed to shift her priorities. She started pulling back from social media, focusing instead on spending time with her kids and figuring out her next steps. It was clear she had a long road ahead, but for the first time, it felt like she was finally living authentically. As for me, I realized my mom's obsession with Lily wasn't really about either of us. It was about her own insecurities and need for control. Understanding that didn't make it any easier to deal with her, but it did help me see the bigger picture. Slowly but surely, the family dynamic was changing. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just a shadow in Lily's spotlight. I was finally standing on my own. Update 4. A few weeks after the family meeting, my mom had a minor health scare. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to send everyone into a panic. She fainted at home one morning and was rushed to the hospital for tests. The doctor said it was a combination of stress and high blood pressure, and she'd need to make some lifestyle changes and attend regular checkups. As much as I've resented my mom over the years, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I stepped in to help, coordinating her doctor visits, picking up her prescriptions, and making sure she was following the doctor's advice. Some relatives offered to pitch in, but most just sent their well wishes and left it at that. The one person who was noticeably absent during all of this was Lily. She called once to check in, but didn't show up to visit. She claimed she was too busy dealing with her own issues, which didn't sit well with my mom. Despite everything I was doing, my mom couldn't resist her usual digs. At one point, while I was organizing her medication, she commented that Lily would have handled things better. It was like she couldn't help herself. I bit my tongue and carried on, but it was frustrating. The breaking point came a few days later. I was driving her home from a follow-up appointment, and she started going on about how Lily had always been the reliable one in the family. I pulled the car over and told her, point blank, that her attitude was the reason our relationship was so fractured. I reminded her of the years of comparisons and how it had affected not just me, but Lily too. She sat in silence for the rest of the drive, and for once, I didn't try to fill the awkwardness with small talk. Word must have gotten around, because over the next few days, several relatives reached out to my mom, urging her to appreciate the support she was getting. My aunt even called to tell her that she was being unfair by holding Lily up as the standard when it was clear she wasn't in a position to help. I don't know if those conversations had any immediate impact, but it was a relief to know that other people were starting to see what I'd been dealing with all these years. Meanwhile, Lily surprised everyone by openly praising me during a phone call with a group of relatives. She told them she was grateful that I was stepping up for our mom because she simply couldn't handle it herself. It was unexpected, but it felt like a turning point in our relationship. Of course, my mom wasn't thrilled. She dismissed Lily's praise, claiming I was just doing what any decent daughter would do. Around the same time, Paul officially moved out of Lily's house. The affair wasn't a secret anymore, and Lily decided it was better to separate than continue the charade of a happy marriage. She didn't make a big announcement, but the family got the memo when Paul didn't show up to her son's birthday party. My mom tried to rationalize his behavior, saying that Lily's lack of effort in maintaining the marriage was probably to blame. It was infuriating but also revealing. Her fixation on Lily's perfection had nothing to do with Lily herself. It was all about maintaining the family's image. Lily and I started talking more regularly during this time. She opened up about how much pressure she'd felt to live up to everyone's expectations, especially our mom's. She admitted that she envied my ability to live authentically, even if it meant dealing with criticism. Hearing that from her felt bittersweet, but it helped me see her struggles in a new light. As the weeks went on, my mom became increasingly isolated in her defense of Lily's so-called perfection. Relatives who once agreed with her started siding with me and Lily, especially after seeing how much effort I was putting into taking care of her. The shift in family dynamics was subtle but noticeable. For the first time, people were questioning the narrative my mom had been pushing for years. In the community, the gossip about Lily's life continued, but it started taking on a different tone. People who once admired her for her perfect image began to express admiration for her vulnerability. A few even reached out to her with words of encouragement, saying they respected her honesty about her struggles. It was clear that the cracks in her facade had made her more relatable, not less. As for me, I started to feel a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. For so long, I'd felt defined by my mom's disapproval and the endless comparisons to Lily. But now, I realized that I didn't need her approval to feel validated. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth, and now I finally saw that I didn't have to. At the next family gathering, something unexpected happened. My mom, in her usual way, started talking about how Lily would have handled a particular situation. But this time, she caught herself mid-sentence. She looked at me, awkwardly nodded, and said, "But you've been doing a good job too." It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I'd ever gotten from her. It felt like a turning point, not just for me, but for the entire family. The tables had turned, and for once, the focus wasn't on trying to uphold an impossible standard. Instead, it was about learning to accept each other, flaws and all. Update 5. The weeks following my mom's health scare and awkward acknowledgement were surprisingly quiet. It felt like the family had reached a tipping point, and everyone was still figuring out where they stood. For the first time, I wasn't walking into gatherings with a knot in my stomach, bracing myself for some new comparison. The dynamic was shifting, slowly but noticeably. One evening, as I was helping my mom organize her paperwork, she blurted out something unexpected. She admitted, albeit reluctantly, that she might have been too harsh on me over the years. "Maybe I didn't give you enough credit," she mumbled, as if the words physically hurt to say. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to one I was going to get. I didn't push her for more. Sometimes progress is incremental. Meanwhile, Lily and I started spending more time together. We weren't exactly best friends overnight, but there was a newfound understanding between us. We talked openly about the expectations we'd both struggled under, her as the golden child and me as the problem child. For the first time, we saw each other as equals, not as the roles our mom had assigned us. She even laughed about how she used to envy my freedom, while I admitted to envying her stability. It felt good to finally clear the air. Around the same time, Lily decided to make some big changes. She moved out of the big house and into a modest apartment with her kids. It wasn't an easy transition, downsizing never is, but she seemed lighter, freer. She started focusing on the things that really mattered to her, like spending quality time with her children and figuring out her next steps. She even began writing a blog about her journey, sharing stories about perfectionism, family, and finding authenticity. To her surprise, it gained a small but supportive following. People appreciated her honesty and vulnerability, which only reinforced her decision to let go of the facade she'd held onto for so long. My mom, however, was struggling to adapt. For years, she'd been the self-appointed authority on who was better in the family, and now that her pedestal was crumbling, she didn't know how to adjust. She still clung to remnants of her old mindset, occasionally making comments about how Lily could bounce back if she just tried harder. But those remarks were becoming less frequent, and when she did make them, they were met with silence, or, in some cases, pushback from other family members. Speaking of family, I started noticing a change in how my extended relatives treated me. People who had once dismissed me as the artsy cousin who couldn't get it together were now asking me about my work, genuinely interested in what I was doing. A few even reached out for advice on branding and design for their small businesses. It felt strange but validating to finally be seen as someone with value. The timing couldn't have been better. Around that same time, I landed a major freelance client, a well-known brand that gave me enough work to feel financially secure for the first time in years. Word got around the family, and even the local community started taking notice. A few people reached out to congratulate me, and for once, it wasn't accompanied by backhanded compliments or comparisons to Lily. It was just genuine support. Despite all this, my mom's resistance lingered. She softened, but she couldn't fully let go of her idolization of Lily. It was clear that her obsession with perfection had less to do with us and more to do with her own insecurities. I started setting firm boundaries, refusing to engage when she tried to steer conversations toward old patterns. If she made a dismissive comment, I didn't take the bait. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary for my peace of mind. Lily, on the other hand, was thriving in her own way. Her blog continued to grow, and she started collaborating with others who shared similar experiences. Watching her embrace this new chapter was inspiring. She wasn't pretending anymore, and it showed. She even thanked me during one of our conversations, saying that without my push, she might never have confronted the truth. It was messy, she admitted, but it was worth it. The rest of the family also began to change. The obsession with outward appearances faded, replaced by a more supportive atmosphere. Relatives who once avoided difficult conversations were now more open, more willing to talk about their struggles instead of hiding behind a mask of perfection. It wasn't a total transformation. There were still moments of awkwardness and old habits, but it was progress. As for my mom, she started reintegrating into the new family dynamic. Her role had shifted. She was no longer the authority everyone deferred to, but she was slowly finding her place in this new reality. The power dynamics had evened out, and while she wasn't thrilled about it, she seemed to be accepting it, little by little. For the first time, I felt at peace with my family dynamic. I didn't need my mom's approval anymore, and I wasn't living in Lily's shadow. Instead, I was carving out my own space, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. Looking back, it's wild to think about how far we've come. What started as a boiling point at a family reunion turned into a series of revelations that reshaped our entire family. Lily and I aren't just cousins anymore. We're allies, friends, and survivors of a shared struggle. And me? I'm no longer the less perfect cousin. I'm just me, and for the first time that feels like enough.